Ohai. New Zealand, the state in Polynesia. The population, following the results of an official census of 2013, makes more than 4 million people. According to estimated data for the beginning of 2017, more than 4.8 million people. The territory minus 268,680 km. On both of these indicators is the largest country of Oceania. Takes 121 places in the world on population. The capital, Wellington. State languages English, Maori and the New Zealand Sign Language. It is subdivided into 17 areas, 9 of which are located on the Northern Island, 7 on the Southern Island, and 1 on the Chatham Archipelago. The Kingdom of New Zealand includes independent and public administration, but the island states of Cook Islands and Niue, which are freely associated with New Zealand, and also the non-self-governing territory of Tokelau and the Antarctic territory of Ross. It is located on 2 large islands, Northern and Southern, and a large number, about 700, adjacent smaller islands in the southwest part of the Pacific Ocean. One of the main features of New Zealand is the geographical isolation. The closest neighbours of the country. To the west, Australia separated by the Tasmania Sea. The shortest distance, about 1700 km. To the north, island territories of New Caledonia. About 1450 km. Tonga. About 1850 km. And Fiji. About 1900 km. The industrial country with developed economy. DDD volume at par of purchasing power for 2017 was $189 billion. About $39000 per capita. Monetary unit, New Zealand dollar. In the 11th-14th centuries, the country was populated with natives of other islands of Polynesia. The European researchers opened islands in 1642. Active land development by Great Britain began since 1762. The first European seafarer who visited the coast of New Zealand, Dutch Abel Tasman, called it Statenland, thinking that in the south New Zealand is connected to the island of the archipelago of Tierra del Fuego of the same name, which is in the south of South America. This name in 1645 was transformed by the Dutch cartographers to Latin Nova Zealandia in honor of one of the provinces of the Netherlands, Zeeland. Zeeland. And in the Dutch name New Zealand. Later the British seafarer James Cook used the English version of this name, New Zealand, in the records, and it became the official name of the country. The Russian name New Zealand is close translation of historically developed name. Early European cartographers called islands Northern Average, Present Ushni, and Ushni, Stillwater Rakura. In 1830, 2 main islands began to be called as Northern and Southern, and by 1907 these names settled. In 2009, Council for Place Names of New Zealand found out that formally names of the main islands weren't established. In 2013 they were officially called Northern, Artiak and Maui, and Ushni, Artutivepanam. Names in Maori and English can be used as interchangeable. The people of Maori, most likely, are descendants of the immigrants from Taiwan to Melanesia migrating to the Society Islands, from where a part of immigrants went to New Zealand. New Zealand, one of the most late populated territories. Radiocarbon analysis. The evidence of deforestation and variability of mitochondrial DNA at Maori allows to draw a conclusion that the first East Polynesians lodged here in 1250-1300 after the long travel on the southern Pacific Islands. Gradually, as settlers' own culture and language was created, they were divided on a Willow tribes and a Hapa clans, which cooperated, competed, and were at war. A part of Maori migrated on the archipelago Chatham, called by them Turikok, were turned into the people of a Moriora with separate culture. Were almost completely destroyed by Moriori in 1835-1862 as a result of gaining Maori from the Willow of Taranaki and diseases delivered by Europeans. In 1862 I survived only 101 Morior, and the last known thoroughbred Morior, Tommy Solomon N., died in 1933. The first Europeans who reached New Zealand came by the ship together with Netherlander Abel Tasman in 1642. As a result of skirmishes with local, 4 members of the team were killed, and at least 1 Maori was wounded by a case shot. The next visit of Europeans took place only in 1769. The British researcher James Cook plotted almost all coastline of islands. After Cook, New Zealand was visited by a great number of the European and North American whalers and seals hunters, and also the trade ships changing food, metal tools, weapon and other goods for the forest, food, artifacts and water. These dealers brought to Maori potatoes and a musket that radically changed agricultural and military way of these people. Potatoes became the reliable source of food which allowed to conduct longer military campaigns. As a result of the intertribal Muscatine Wars, which united more than 600 fights in 1801-1840, from 30 to 40,000 Maori were killed. Since the beginning of the 19th century, the Christian missionaries who turned most of natives into the belief began to lodge in New Zealand. In the 19th century, the autochthonic population of the country was reduced to 40% of Docontaktney level. The delivered diseases were the main reason for it. In 1788, the Captain Arthur Phillip accepted a post of the governor of the new British colony of New South Wales, and including at the time in New Zealand. The British government appointed James Basby the British resident in New Zealand in 1832 after obtaining the petition from Northern Maori. 3 years later, having learned about the emergence of the French settlement of Charles de Tourien, the Confederation of Tribes of Maori sent to the King William for the Declaration of Independence and asking protection. As orders for on the settlement in New Zealand of the New Zealand Company, and which by then already sent the ship to islands for purchase of lands at Maori, and the ambiguous legal status of the Declaration of Independence forced the Ministry of Affairs of Colonies to send the Captain William Dobson to New Zealand for establishment of the British sovereignty and signing of the agreement with Maori. The contract Waitangi was signed in the Gulf Bay of Islands on February 6, 1840. In response to attempts of the New Zealand Company to create the independent settlement in Wellington and the French settlers to buy lands in Okoro, Dobson proclaimed the British sovereignty over all New Zealand on May 21, 1840, though by that moment not all copies of the contract were signed with Maori. After that, the number of immigrants, especially British, began to grow. New Zealand became the colony of the same name separate of New South Wales, on May 3, 1841. In 1852 the colony received the representative government N, and 2 years the first meeting of the first Parliament N took place later. In 1856 the colony received self-government, and all internal questions, except policy for the native population, decided there independently. New Zealand received control over colonial policy in the middle of the 1860th years. Being afraid that the Southern Island can want to create separate colony, the head of colony Alfred Talmot issued the resolution on transfer of the capital from Auckland to Cook Strait. Wellington was elected the new capital for arrangement in the center of the country and the comfortable bay. The Parliament for the first time held a meeting in Wellington in 1865. Within Britain, number of migrants, the conflicts were the earthward developed into the New Zealand land wars of the 1860th, the 1870th years, as a result of which at Maori the set of lands was confiscated broke out. In 1891 the first political party, the Liberal Party, and under the chairmanship of John Ballance, came to the power in the country. The Liberal government, later headed by Richard Seddon, adopted a set of important socio-economic laws. In 1893 New Zealand became the first ever country which granted to all women the right to vote and in 1894 for the first time in the world adopted the law on an order of settlement of disputes between employers and labor unions. And in 1898 Seddon's government adopted the Pensions Act on an old age, which became to the first in the British Empire. In 1907, at the request of Parliament of New Zealand, the King Edward VII proclaimed it the dominion of the British Empire that reflected her actual self-government. The Westminster Statute was adopted by N in 1947. He brought New Zealand out of obligatory acceptance of actions of the British Parliament. New Zealand participated in world politics, having been involved in the First and Second World Wars as a part of the British Empire, and also suffered from the Great Depression. As a result of a depression, the first Labour government was elected and construction of the state of general welfare with protectionist economy began. Prosperity of New Zealand began after the end of World War II, then Maori began to move to the cities from villages in job searches. There was a protest movement of Maori and criticizing Eurocentrism and dealing with such issues as increase in popularity of culture of Maori and settlement of disputes of the contract Waitangi. In 1975 the Tribunal of Waitangi, and which purpose was an investigation of alleged violations of terms of the contract, was organized, and 10 years made the decision later. The government claims about the end of settlement of disputes and with many to a willow. However, in the old years there were friction concerning accessory of a tidal strip of the coast and a seabed. In 1987 New Zealand for the first time in the world legislatively proclaimed the territory a denuclearized zone. As a result of adoption of that statute, New Zealand imposed a ban on an entrance to the territorial waters of the ships with nuclear weapon on board and with nuclear power plants that significantly limited a possibility of calling of the ships of the navies of the USA ports of New Zealand. In April 2013 in the country same-sex marriages were legalized. New Zealand continues to develop as the independent democratic country and the active participant of the international economic and political relationship, paying special attention to development and strengthening of relationship among the countries of the Pacific and Asian region. On March 15, 2019 there was the largest terrorist attack in the history of the country. Massachusetts executions in mosques of the city of Christchurch. As a result of the attack, 50 people died. New Zealand, one of the stablest and well-operated countries of the world. As of 2014, New Zealand was the fourth in force of democratic institutes in the world and the second in absence of corruption after Denmark. In New Zealand, the activity of the population on elections, 77% in comparison with average on USA of 68%, is high. New Zealand, the unitary state founded on the principles of constitutional monarchy and parliamentary democracy. The principle of the Westminster model of parliamentarism, which is that the political power is carried out by democratically elected parliament, is the basis for a system of state system. The Queen reigns, but the government governs until her support of the House of Representatives. In 1840, the Contract Waitangi, under which the islands of New Zealand became colony of Great Britain, was signed. The monarchy of New Zealand legally differs from the British monarchy, as in 1947 New Zealand ratified the Westminster Statute of 1931, which granted to the country the right to adopt own laws. New Zealand, together with her dependent territories of Tokelau, the Antarctic Territory of Ross and freely associated states of Cook Islands and Niue, make the Kingdom of New Zealand. In New Zealand there is no codified constitution. The constitution includes the Queen's prerogatives, the constitutional acts and charters of the United Kingdom, which were included in the constitutional base of New Zealand. The Great Charter of Liberties. Important constitutional acts are the Constitutional Law of 1986, in which the head of state, the Queen of Great Britain, admits and three branches of the power are designated: executive, government, legislative, parliament, and judicial. The Bill of the Rights of 1990 were Basic Rights and Freedoms of the Person, and the Law on Elections of 1993 confirming free and democratic elections as stated. The head of state is the monarch of New Zealand, which since February 6, 1952 Queen Elizabeth II is. The status of the monarch is defined by the constitutional principle, reigns, but doesn't operate, and the monarch has no significant political effect, keeping a ceremonial and symbolical role. Nevertheless, a number of functions are legislatively assigned to the monarch and can be executed only by him. Among the most important powers, appointment of the Governor-General and signing of the decree on that appointment. The announcement of convocation or dissolution of Parliament of the country. New Zealand, together with some other member countries of the British Commonwealth of Nations, embodies the principle of division of the monarch underlain in the Balfour Declaration of 1926. The interests of the monarch in the territory of the country are represented by the Governor-General. An official title: the Governor-General and the Supreme Commander in New Zealand, Governor-General and Commander-in-Chief in and over New Zealand. Appointed by the monarch according to the recommendation of the Prime Minister, as a rule, for a period of 5 years. The oath of the Governor-General is taken by the Supreme Judge of New Zealand. A fundamental obligation of the Governor-General is representation of interests of the monarch, and his functions are limited to a role of the guarantor of constitutional rights, ceremonial duties. For example, appointment of ministers of the recommendation of the Prime Minister, and public activity. As the guarantor of constitutional rights, the Governor-General provides legitimacy and the sequence in work of the government of the country and executes a number of the formal legislative actions made according to the recommendation of the Prime Minister, and royal prerogatives, such as dissolution of Parliament before the next elections or appointment of the Prime Minister. In pursuance of the ceremonial functions, the Governor-General is present at the opening ceremony of meetings of a new session of Parliament, receives credentials of again appointed ambassadors of other states in New Zealand, heads receptions of heads of state and government of other countries in New Zealand. Is public work the Governor-General and her/his spouse. A. Participate in work of perpetually councils of many charitable societies and participate in civil ceremonies. Since 1967 only citizens of New Zealand are appointed to a post of the Governor-General. The power of the Queen and Governor-General is limited to the Constitution, and usually demands the sanction of the Cabinet of the country. Parliament of New Zealand, the unicameral regulatory authority consisting of the monarch of the country. Represented in everyday activity by the Governor-General. And the House of Representatives. Earlier in New Zealand there was also the second chamber of Parliament, the Legislative Council, which was abolished in 1951. The role of the monarch in work of Parliament is defined by functions of convocation and dissolution of the Parliament and assignment of royal sanctions on the acts adopted by the House of Representatives. The supremacy of Parliament and over Corona initially appeared in Great Britain in Bill about the Rights, and was fixed in New Zealand by the separate law later. The first Parliament of the country was created in 1852. Administrative management of sessions of Parliament is exercised by his Speaker. The House of Representatives is elected by citizens as a result of democratic elections, after which the winning party or the coalition forms the government. In the absence of such opportunity and the corresponding vote, the government of minority turns up. The leader of winning party or the coalition becomes the Prime Minister usually. The office consisting of the Prime Minister and Ministers is the supreme legislative body of the state. He bears responsibility for the most important actions of the government. By tradition, members of the Cabinet are connected by collective responsibility of and for decisions. The House of Representatives of New Zealand. English New Zealand House of Representatives. Consists of 120 dix, from which 7 are reserved for Maori. Members of the House of Representatives are elected according to the Law on Elections of 1993. Every 3 years during the general national election, which is taking place on the principles of the mixed proportional electoral system. The House of Representatives chooses cabinet ministers and the Prime Minister of the country from among. In 1936, New Zealand became the first ever country which is regularly broadcasting sessions of Parliament on radio. Since 1951, the House of Representatives is the only chamber of Parliament of the country. After adoption in 1947 of the Westminster Statute, the House of Representatives became the supreme electoral legislature of the country. Based on historical tradition, the House of Representatives of New Zealand in the structure and the organization was under construction on the principles of the Westminster model of parliamentarism. Significant changes in such model began to happen only in the 1958 years. In 1951, the Supreme Legislative Council with the appointed dix was abolished, and the Parliament became unicameral and completely elective. The procedure of work of chamber changed. The head of the government of New Zealand is the Prime Minister. The leader of the party fraction which received the majority, including and the coalition majority. During elections of members of the House of Representatives becomes the Prime Minister of the country. The Prime Minister is appointed to the post the Governor-General. As well as in many other codes defining a role of these or those statesmen of New Zealand, duties of the Prime Minister of the country have no legislative description and in many respects are defined by the constitutional customs. His situation in the environment of other dicks of the House of Representatives is defined by the principle, the first among equal, and, holding the highest administrative position, the Prime Minister, nevertheless, is obliged to adhere to decisions of the Cabinet. Among basic rights and duties of the Prime Minister of New Zealand, it is possible to call the right to define the agenda of meetings of the House of Representatives, the right to present to the Governor-General of candidates for appointment and dismissal from the positions ministers, the right to appoint and remove the Deputy Prime Minister from the position, the right to ask the Queen the Governor-General to offer date of new parliamentary elections, the right to recommend to the monarch of the candidate for the Governor-General's post. In October 2017, Jacinda Ardern, the leader of the Labour Party, became the Prime Minister. The Cabinet is executive body of the House of Representatives and the supreme body of executive power of the country. The Prime Minister is the Secretary of the Cabinet. All Cabinet Ministers are at the same time members of Executive Council. Cabinet Ministers are appointed the Governor-General according to the recommendation of the Prime Minister and are Ministers of the Government. English Cabinet Ministers of New Zealand, though in some cases the Minister of the Government cannot be a Cabinet Minister. In the work, the Cabinet is subdivided into the industry committees preparing the drafts of decisions submitted after that for final discussion by committee. Decisions of Committee of Ministers are made by a simple majority vote. Executive Council, advisory body at the Governor-General. The Member of Parliament can only be the member of Executive Council. Members of Executive Council are Royal Ministers, English Ministers of the Crown, regardless of whether they are Cabinet Ministers. Decisions of Executive Council are, as a rule, submitted by directly Governor-General. Though the Governor-General also isn't a member of Council, and are formed on the basis of the policy determined by the Cabinet. The common law is the cornerstone of the legal system of New Zealand. Appointments of judges and judicial workers aren't influenced by political reasons, they are under strict control of term of tenure in order that judicial authority remained independent of the government as that is demanded by the Constitution. Theoretically, it means that the judiciary can interpret the law on the basis of exclusively acts of Parliament, without coming under foreign influence. The London Judicial Committee of Privy Council was Court of Appeal of Final Instance till 2004 when the Supreme Court of New Zealand then appeared. Judicial authority: the Supreme Judge of New Zealand N, including Court of Appeal N, the High Court N and all heads the submitting court's more lowest instance. Besides, in New Zealand 62 district courts. District Court, in which all cases where the defendant isn't threatened by life imprisonment are considered work or the amount of damage doesn't exceed New Zealand dollars. Also the system of specialized judicial institutes: Family Court, which is engaged in hearing of cases connected with parental responsibilities; Youth Court, for hearing of cases of the minding persons aged from 12 up to 16 years; Nature Protection Court, court concerning the labor law, and some other works in the country. Almost all parliamentary elections in 1853, 1993 took place in New Zealand and on the system of relative majority. From the 1930th on the political horizon of the country, two parties, National and Labour, dominate. Since 1996 the kind of proportional vote, the mixed electoral system, is used. Each voter has two voices. One for vote on single candidate districts, and several chairs are reserved for Maori, and another per lot. Since 2014 in the country 71 chairs are reserved for the single mandate deputy, including 7 for Maori. And the others 49 are distributed so that the quantity of chairs at party corresponded to the number of the voters who voted for her. However, for hit in Parliament the party has to or overcome 5% qualification, or win 1 chair in the single candidate district. Such system practically deprives any one party of an opportunity to take all places in chamber, and is important a question of the party coalitions which often appear even before elections. From March 2005 to August 2006, New Zealand was the only country in the world where all major positions in the government, the head of state, the Governor-General, the Prime Minister, the Speaker of Parliament and the Chief Judge of the Supreme Court, borrowed only women. Each citizen of New Zealand who reached 18 years has the right to propose the candidate on elections to the House of Representatives. Each citizen of New Zealand and its permanent resident has the right to participate in elections. Elections take place every 3 years. As of 2015 in New Zealand, 15 political parties, 7 of them are registered or presented in Parliament of the country. Besides, in the country about 15 more unregistered political parties work. The largest parties of the country, it is considered to be both the centre-right National Party and the left-centrist Labour Party. During the early period of history, foreign trade and foreign policy were sent to the power to the British colonial government. At imperial conferences 1923 and 1926 of years, it was decided that New Zealand can sign political contracts, and the first such contract with Japan was ratified in 1928. On September 3, 1939, New Zealand joined Great Britain and declared war of Germany, and the Prime Minister Michael Savage said, "Where she goes, there are also we." In 1951, Great Britain began to pay more and more attention to the interests in Europe, whereas New Zealand, Australia and the USA signed the contract ANZUS. Participation of New Zealand in political life of the island states of the Pacific Ocean is noticeable. A considerable part of humanitarian aid of New Zealand goes to these countries. The great number of locals moves to New Zealand in job searches. According to laws of 1970 on the Samoan quota and 2002 about the Pacific visa, up to 1,100 Samoans and up to 750 people from other Pacific states can become constant residents of New Zealand every year. In 2007 there was also an opportunity to receive a temporary working visa for performance of seasonal works, and in 2009 on her there arrived about 800 residents of the Pacific countries. Armed forces of New Zealand are divided into 3 types of troops. Navies of New Zealand, Army of New Zealand and Royal Air Force of New Zealand. National security doesn't demand big expenses in view of the small probability of direct attack. Maintenance costs of armed forces and defense of the country are made by about 1% of GDP. The country was involved in both world wars, including the Dardanelles Operation, Cretan Operation, El Alamein and Battle under Monte Cassino. The campaign in Dardanelles played an important role in formation of the New Zealand national identity and strengthened the experience of participation, general with Australia, in Anzac. According to Mary Edmund Pohl, World War I left scars on society of New Zealand. About people died as a result of war, more than were wounded. The set is psychologically injured. From the total number of soldiers and the population sent across the ocean, there is a little more 1 million. New Zealand played a key role in sea fight at La Plata and the Air Battle of Britain. During World War II of the USA placed in New Zealand more than 400,000 contingent. Besides, New Zealand took part in Korean, Anglo-Boer, Malay and Afghan wars and in the war in the Persian Gulf. The New Zealand regional and global peacekeeping missions participated in missions on Cyprus, in Somalia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Sinai, Angola, Cambodia, on the Irano-Iraqi border, Bougainville, in East Timor and also on the Solomon Islands. New Zealand took the 8th place in the rating of the Centre of Global Development N of 2012, listing the most developed countries on degree of the involvement into improvement of welfare of poorer states. New Zealand the 4th in the rating of peacefulness of 2014. New Zealand, being among the most developed countries of the world, steadily takes the leading positions in the world rankings of the standard of living and economic and social development. The flag of New Zealand approved on March 24, 1902 represents a rectangular panel in the ratio 1:2. The prototype of a present flag with a blue banner and a flag of Great Britain in a corner appeared in 1865 as a result of the government resolution that the ships of all British colonies have to have such flag. In 1867, 1869 in the right bottom corner there were red letters N's, and in 1869, 1902 red stars with a white border. A blue background of a flag is associated with blue color of the sky and sea, surrounding the country. Stars of the Southern Cross carry out communication with location of the country in the southern part of the Pacific Ocean. The symbolics of a flag of Great Britain says about historical heritage that the country was the former British colony. The first state emblem of New Zealand was introduced into circulation in 1911. The current coat of arms was accepted in 1956. The coat of arms represents the board withheld on the one hand by the blonde woman with a flag of New Zealand in hands and on the other hand the soldier of Maori. Over a board St. Edward's crown towers. Under a board 2 branches of a fern are located. The coat of arms is associated with unity of all cultures and the people inhabiting the country and with commitment of the New Zealand monarchy. Two anthems are recognized as state in New Zealand, My God, Protect New Zealand, and My God, Store the Queen. Though both have the equal status, My God, Protect New Zealand, it is more used. The text, My God, Protect New Zealand, it was written in 1870 by Thomas Bracken. John Joseph Woods became the winner of the competition on music to the text held in 1876. The song received popularity, and in 1940 the government of the country acquired copyright of her and defined as the national anthem. But only in 1977 the song was legislatively approved as the second national anthem. The text of the anthem, "My God, Protect New Zealand," consists of 5 couplets. The original of the text is written in English. The official version has also the translation into language of Maori. Traditionally, on governmental activities only the first couplet is executed. At first the version in language of Maori, then the version in English sounds. New Zealand is located in the southwest part of the Pacific Ocean in a Polynesian triangle in the central region of a hemisphere of water. The main territory of the country is made by 2 islands having the corresponding names, South Island and Severn Island, which are divided by Cook Strait, which width is 22.5 km in the bottleneck. The western coast of islands is washed by the Tasmania Sea, other coast of the country, the Pacific Ocean. Except 2 main islands, New Zealand possesses about 700 islands, considerably to the smaller area, the majority of which are uninhabited. The largest of them are the island of Stewart, Antipodes, the island Auckland, Bounty Island, Campbell Island, Archipelago Chatham and the Kermadec Islands. The total area of the country is 268,680 km. It is at a little less by the sizes than Italy or Japan, but are slightly more than Great Britain. Length of the coastline of New Zealand is 15,134 kilometers. The Southern Island, the largest island of New Zealand and the 12th largest island on the planet, its area makes 150,437 km. On the island, the 1/4 part of the population of the country lives approximately. Along the island from the north on the south, the ridge of the folded Southern Alps mountains, which highest top is Mount Cook. 43A, so 170 GAOL, other official name Araki. 3724 m high extends. Except her, on the southern island there are 18 more tops more than 300 m high. East part of the island, more flat, is also almost completely busy with agricultural grounds. The western coast of the island is populated much less densely. Here considerable massifs of almost untouched nature with a virgin plant and animal life remained. The western part is well known for also numerous national parks, fjords and glaciers which are going down from slopes of the Southern Alps directly to the Tasman Sea. The biggest lake of the island, Te Anau. The second in area lake of New Zealand. Northern Island, of 113,729 km. The 14th largest island on the planet. The island, considerably less forest than Ushni, is also more convenient for creation of settlements and seaports. For this reason on him the most part of the population lives, and here the largest cities of the country are located. The highest point of the northern island is the active volcano of Ruapehu. 39 ISO 175 ADAOL. 2797 meters high. The northern island differs in high volcanic activity. From 6 volcanic zones of the country, 5 are located on it. In the center of the northern island, Lake Taupo, the biggest lake in New Zealand, is located. From the Waikato River, which length is 425 kilometers, that is her by the Long River in New Zealand originates. The relief of New Zealand represents generally steep hills. On the northern island. And mountains. On the southern island. More than 75% of the territory of the country lie at the height more than 200 m above sea level. The majority of mountains of the northern island don't exceed 1700 m high. 19 peaks of the southern island are higher than 1300 m. Coastal zones of the northern island are presented by spacious valleys. On the western coast of the southern island, fjords are located. Plains borrow up 10% of the territory of the country. The climate of New Zealand changes from warm subtropical in the north of the northern island, to cool moderated in the south and in the central regions of the southern island. In mountainous areas the severe alpine climate prevails. The chain of the high southern Alps divides the country in half and, blocking away two primary western winds, divides her into two various climatic zones. The western coast of the southern island, the most damp part of the country. East part, which is in only 100 kilometers from it, the driest. The East Australian current passing through the Tasman Sea between Australia and New Zealand. This climate of islands and east coast of Australia warmer and damp, tropical instead of subtropical. Promotes distribution of tropical sea fauna to subtropical areas along the southeast coast of Australia and New Zealand. On the most part of New Zealand the level of rainfall is from 600 to 1600 millimeters a year. They are distributed rather evenly within a year, except for drier summer period. Average annual temperature is from +10 C in the south, up to +16 C in the north. The coldest months, July, and the warmest months, January and February. In the north of New Zealand differences between winter and summer temperatures aren't really considerable, but in the south and in foothill areas the difference reaches 14 C. In mountainous regions of the country with increase in height temperature sharply goes down, approximately on 0.7 C each 100 meters. In Auckland, the largest city of the country, average annual temperature is +15.1 C. At the same time the most high recorded temperature made +30.5 C, and the smallest 2.5 C. In the capital of the country, Wellington, average annual temperature is +12.8 C, the largest recorded temperature, +31.1 C, the smallest 1.9 C. The lowest temperature in all Oceania was observed in New Zealand, as she is located further everything from the equator among the countries of Oceania to the 47th parallel south. In the city of Ranfurly on July 18, 1903 and was 25.6 degrees. The absolute maximum of temperature in New Zealand was noted in the city of Rangiora, to equal +42.4 degrees in the northeast of the southern island, between 43 and 44 parallels, is closer to 43. The absolute minimum and a maximum of temperature in the country were observed on the southern island, where more continental climate, than on the northern island. The number of the sundial in a year is rather high, especially in the areas protected from the western winds. On the most part of the territory it makes not less than 2000 hours. Peak values of solar radiation in the country are about 40% higher North American in view of the small thickness of an ozone layer over Antarctic, because of what New Zealand has one of the highest incidences of skin cancer in the world. Snowfalls are extremely rare in coastal areas of the north of the country and in the western part of the southern island. In other regions, insignificant and short snow rainfall is possible in winter months. The islands forming New Zealand are located in the Pacific geosynclinal belt between two Earth's plates, Pacific and Australian. Throughout the long historical periods, the place of a break between two plates was exposed to the difficult geological processes which are constantly changing structure and forms of crust. For this reason, unlike the majority of islands of the Pacific Ocean, the islands of New Zealand are formed not only as a result of volcanic activity, but also as a result of dumpings and are put from geological breeds of different structure and different age. Vigorous tectonic activity in crust of this region continues also at the present geological stage of formation of our planet. And her results are noticeable even for historically short term since the beginning of development of islands by Europeans. So, for example, as a result of a destructive earthquake of 1855, the coastal line near Wellington rose more than by 1.5 meters, and in 1931, also as a result of a strong earthquake near the city of Napier, about 9 km rose to a surface of the water. Sushi. The arrangement of New Zealand is historically connected with vigorous volcanic activity in her territory. Researchers assume its beginning in the period of an early Miocene, and the period of formation of modern zones of the increased volcanic activity was complete in the period of a late Pliocene. The largest volcanic eruptions, presumably, took place in the period of a late Pliocene, an early Pleistocene, when about 5 million cubic kilometers of breed could be cast out on the Earth's surface. At the present stage, a zone of the increased tectonic activity and the high number of earthquakes interfaced to it is the western coast of the southern island and the northeast coast of the northern island. The annual quantity of earthquakes in the country is up to 15000, most of them small and can be only about 250 annually. Referred to number noticeable as strong. In modern history, the strongest earthquake is recorded in 1855 near Wellington, measuring about 8.2 points. The earthquake of 1931 near Napier, which claimed 256 human lives, became the most destructive. The volcanic activity in modern New Zealand is still high, and in the territory of the country 6 volcanic zones, 5 of which are located on the northern island, are active. Near Lake Taupo in 186 BB there was the largest documentary recorded volcanic eruption in the history of mankind, Tuhatepa. Consequences of eruption are described in historical chronicles of so remote places as China and Greece. The freshwater Lake Taupo, largest in the Pacific region, the area comparable to the territory of Singapore, is at the place of eruption now. New Zealand is located on border of the Indo-Australian and Pacific seismic rings. Processes of their interaction, including a fast raising of the massive and vigorous volcanic activity during 2 million years, define geology of the land massif of islands. Despite a variety of natural minerals, only gas fields, oil, gold, silver, fruiterous sandstone and coal are industrially developed. Except the above mentioned, there are extensive reserves of limestone and clays, including bentonite clay, aluminum, titanous iron ore, antimony, chrome, copper, zinc, manganese, mercury, tungsten, platinum, heavy spar and a number of other minerals often meet, but their reconnoitered industrial stocks are small. Since 1997, all fields and all production of nephrite are sent to management of Maori, in connection with that important historical role which products from nephrite, to Panem, play in the culture of these people. The confirmed gold reserves in New Zealand make 372 tons. In 2002, gold mining made a few less than 10 tons. The confirmed silver reserves in New Zealand make 308 tons. In 2002, extraction of silver was nearly 29 tons. The confirmed reserves of Fruiterous sandstone make 874 million tons. His commercial production is begun in the 1960th years. In 2002, production was about 2.4 million tons. The confirmed reserves of natural gas in New Zealand make 68 billion m. Commercial production of gas is begun in 1970. In 2005, natural gas production in the country made approximately 50 mol m. Reserves of oil make approximately 14 million tons. Her commercial production is begun in 1935. Oil production in the country considerably decreases in recent years. In 2005, oil production in the country made a little more than 7 million barrels. Coal mining volumes, steadily rising many decades, are stabilized in the first decade of the 21st century thanks to the programs directed to decrease in consumption of solid fuel. About a third of the extracted coal is sent for export. 60 coal mines continue to work in the country. New Zealand is isolated from other islands and continents by long sea distances. The western coast Tasman Sea washing it separates the country from Australia on 1700 km. The Pacific Ocean washes east coast of the country and separates the country from the closest neighbors, in the north, from New Caledonia on 1000 km. In the east from Chile on 8700 km. In the south from Antarctica on 2500 km. Extent of a coastal strip of New Zealand is 15134 km. Territorial waters -12 nautical miles. An exclusive economic zone up to 200 nautical miles. The area of a sea exclusive economic zone is about km. What by 15 times surpasses the area of the land surface of the country. Near New Zealand there are two constant sea currents, warm East Australian and a current of the western winds. East Australian, following on the north and the northeast, washes the western part of the Northern Island. The current of the western winds is noticeable in the south, and the main stream passes it to the south of the southern island in east direction. In coastal waters of the country about 700 small islands are located, most of them is at distance up to 50 km from the main islands. From total number are only about 60 suitable for accommodation or are populated now. Thanks to special geological and geographical conditions in New Zealand there are a lot of rivers and lakes. The majority of the rivers short, less than 50 km, originate in mountains and quickly go down to plains where they slow down the current. Waikato, the largest river of the country, 425 km long. In the country 33 rivers more than 100 km long and 6 rivers from 51 to 95 km long also flow. Total length of the rivers and other internal waterways in the country is km. In New Zealand, 30 to 80 lakes with an area of water mirror more than 0.01 km. 229 lakes have a water mirror more than 0.5 km. And 40 more than 10 km. The largest lake of the country, Taupo. The area -623 km. The deepest lake, Hauroko. Depth -462 meters. The majority of lakes of the Northern Island are formed as a result of volcanic activity, and the majority of lakes of the Southern Island are formed by glacial activity. New Zealand, one of the few countries of the Southern Hemisphere having glaciers in the territory. Tasmanian, Fox, Franz Josef, etc. The Tasmanian Glacier forms narrow ice language 27 km long, width in places to 3 km. Its total area -52 km. In some parts he reaches thickness of 610 m and is the largest glacier of New Zealand. The average annual volume of renewable water resources, according to statistical data of 1977-2001, in New Zealand is estimated at 327 km. What makes about 85 m/year per capita. In 2001, resources of a river drain and lakes made about 320 km. Resources of glaciers about 70 km. Resources of atmospheric moisture near -400 km. And resources of underground waters were estimated approximately at 613 km. Protection and water resources management and the water supply system of the population and objects of economy in New Zealand is under authority of local governments. The cost of the fixed business assets of a water management complex is estimated more than at $1 billion New Zealand dollars. The systems of the centralized water supply provide with drinking water about 85% of the population of the country. About 77% of the fresh water consumed in the country are used in irrigational systems. Long historical isolation and remoteness from other continents created unique and in many respects the unique natural world of islands of New Zealand, differing in a large number of endemic plants and birds. Still about 1,000 years ago, before emergence on islands of constant settlements of the person, historically completely there were no mammals. The exception was made by two species of bats and the whales living in coastal waters, the New Zealand sea lion and the New Zealand seal. Along with arrival on these lands of the first permanent residents, Polynesians, on-island small rats, Rattus exulans, and dogs appeared. Later the first European immigrants brought pigs, cows, goats, mice and cats. Development of the European settlements in the 19th century caused emergence in New Zealand everything new and new animal species. Emergence of some of them had extremely negative impact on flora and fauna of islands. It is necessary to carry two such animals, rats, cats, polecats, rabbits, delivered to the country for hunting development. The ermines, delivered to the country for control over population of rabbits. Delivered also opossums for development of the fur industry. When it was necessary to set animals free, they began to climb on columns with wires and to gnaw them. As a result, the city was left without current, and animals perished. It was necessary to upholster all columns with tin that opossums couldn't get upward. People also thoughtlessly delivered black swans, woodpeckers, canaries, larks, geese, both wild and house, and many other bird species. They delivered rats and small birds serve as food to the herd boyuk, an endemic of New Zealand. Besides, the person brought deer, pigs and other large mammals whom he released to New Zealand, considering that so the woods will look more beautifully. Without having natural enemies in the surrounding nature, populations of these animals reached such sizes that natural representatives of flora and fauna of New Zealand appeared under serious threat. Only in recent years some coastal islands were saved by efforts of environmental agencies of New Zealand from these animals that allowed to hope for preservation of a natural environment there. From representatives of fauna of New Zealand, the birds of a kiwi, Apterigiformes, who became a national symbol of the country, are the most known. Among birds it is also necessary to note a key. Nestor notabilis, or Nestor, Strygopsa broctilis, or an Knowles parrot, Itakaka, Notarones hochstelteri, or a wingless sultanka. Only in New Zealand remains of the not-flying birds of Moa, Dinornis, exterminated about 500 years ago, each reaching height of 3.5 m remained. A little later, presumably only about 200 years ago, exterminated also the largest of the known species of eagles, Haast's eagle, who had wingspan to 3 meters and weighing up to 15 kg. Among the reptiles which are found in New Zealand it is possible to note a Gatteria, Cynodon punctatus, and a Stzinca, Cincidae. The only representative insectivorous, delivered to the country and adapting to free conditions of dwelling in her, is the European hedgehog, Erinaceus europaeus. In New Zealand there are no snakes, and from spiders are poisonous only. 29 species of fish live in fresh reservoirs of the country, 8 of which are on the verge of disappearance, such as New Zealand. About 300 species of fish and other inhabitants of the sea live in the coastal seas. The woods of the country are divided into two main types, mixed subtropical and evergreen. In forests Nagaplatnik, Podocarpus dominate. Remained, though thickets of Anagotus New Zealand were sharply reduced during industrial development of the woods. And a Dacrydiuma cypress. In artificial forests, which area is in general about 2 million hectares, the pine radiant, Pinus radiata, delivered to New Zealand in the middle of the 19th century, is generally grown up. Planting of a radiant pine around Kaingaroa forest created the world's largest artificially grown up wood. New Zealand has the most large number of hepatic mosses in comparison with other countries. In the territory of the country there are 606 of their types, 50% from them are made by endemics. Listostobelny mosses are widespread. A bryoflora of New Zealand includes 523 species of Listostobelny mosses. among about 70 forget-me-nots. Myosotis. Known in the nature of types, about 30 are endemics of New Zealand. Unlike forget-me-nots in other parts of the planet, have only two appearance of these plants in New Zealand: blue collar, Myosotis antarctica, and Myosotis capitata. From 187 species of flowering grassy plants of natural flora of New Zealand, 157 endemics. In New Zealand, the quantity of ferns meets unusually big, in comparison with other territories' similar climatic conditions. Cyathea silveri. Cyathea dealbata. Also known in the country as a silver fern, is one of the standard national symbols, and it is represented on the national coat of arms of the country. One of the main symbols of New Zealand are its diligently kept green and clean. English green and clean New Zealand. Also 100% clean. English 100% of pure New Zealand. Image. For this reason, questions of protection and environmental protection are one of priority in development of the country. In 2005, New Zealand became the first ever country in which the carbon tax was imposed. As one of the important prospective directions planned to become by 2020 the first ever country having neutral balance of emission of carbon of the atmosphere, and by that to achieve recognition for itself ranks of the cleanest country in the world. The legislation of the country determines about 60 types of the natural territories which are subject to protection and preservation, among them by the largest and significant forms national parks, including marine parks, nature, scientific, ecological and tourist reserves, and wildlife reserves are. In the country, 14 national parks, 4 marine parks, 21 sea and coastal reserves, and more than 1,300 wildlife reserves are created. The total area of the national parks, reserves and natural territories which are under protection is about 6.5 million hectares, or about 25% of the total area of the country. In the country, several zoos and botanical gardens, the largest of which is more than 170 animal species. The Auckland Zoo opened in 1922 and containing in the territory function. Besides, large zoos are open in the cities of Wellington and Auckland, and the only zoo works with free keeping of animals in Christchurch. The unique park directed to preservation of animals of a subfamily big cats was created near the city of Whangarei. Strong earthquake measuring 7.1 in the region of Canterbury, on the southern island of New Zealand. Utes +12. Which occurred on September 4 at 4 hours 35 minutes local time. Epicenter was in 40 km to the west of Christchurch, near the town of Darfield. The hypocenter was at a depth only 10 km. The earthquake measuring 6.3 occurred on February 22, 2011 at coast of New Zealand. Epicenter of an earthquake was in close proximity to the second largest city of the country, Christchurch on South Island. 147 people died. According to J.P. Morgan, the earthquake in New Zealand can cost insurance companies $12 billion. A series of earthquakes measuring from 6.2 to 7.4 happened on November 13, 2016 on the southern island. Epicenter of tremors was approximately in 39 km to the southwest from the city of Kaikoura at a depth of 10 km. 2 persons died. Because of the existing huge ozone gap over Antarctica, in New Zealand very strong ultraviolet radiation. As a result, cancer of skin is the most common form of cancer in New Zealand. Annually 67,000 cases of this disease, while other types of cancer diseases of only 16,000 cases a year are registered. The number of patients with a melanoma in New Zealand and Australia are approximately 4 times higher than in Canada, the USA and Great Britain. This situation, with the fact that many inhabitants, descendants of the British who always differed in light skin, is aggravated. And the person with light skin to burn in New Zealand happens enough also 15 minutes old. People with light skin need to use protective cream. The largest cities, population 2007. Auckland Card, Wellington Card, Christchurch 378,700, Hamilton 163,900, Dunedin 114,600, Tauranga 114,200, Palmerston North 78800, Hastings 64600, Nelson 58300, Napier 57900, Rotorua 55500, New Plymouth 51000, Bangor 50900, Invercargill 47900, Whanganui 39800, Gisborne 33600. New Zealand is located in 2 time zones. South Island and Northern and also adjacent small islands use a standard New Zealand time. New Zealand Standard Time or ENST, and is at 12 o'clock ahead of the World Coordinate Time. UTS. Islands of the archipelago Chatham use Standard Time Chatham. Chatham Standard Time or CHAST, and are located for 12 hours 45 minutes ahead of the World Coordinate Time. During the summer period, Hines are trying for 1 hour ahead, and the difference with the World Coordinate Time during this period makes 13 hours for ENST and 13 hours 45 minutes for CHAST. The first European immigrants who located in New Zealand divided the country into provinces. For creation of more centralized system of financial management by territories, division of the country into provinces was cancelled in 1876. As a result of it, New Zealand still has no system of interstate administrative territorial division, similar to the fact that in other countries the province, the state, the area can be called. The available system of submission of territories is under construction on the principle of local government. Since 1989, the system constructed on use of regional councils, regional council, and territorial departments works. Modern New Zealand has 12 regional councils which are carrying out local government and responsible for problems of the environment and the system of regional transport. Besides 74 territorial departments, 16 city councils, 57 local councils and 1 island, which are responsible for the systems of roads and communication in the region, the life support systems which are carrying out supervision and regulation in construction, etc. Work. Now in New Zealand there are following areas managed by regional councils. New Zealand owns 9 island groups which are in subtropical and subantarctic zones. 7 of them don't enter neither regions, nor districts of any administrative unit. They are in direct management of special body. The archipelago Chatham has the status of special territorial unit, and the island of Solander is included into the region Southland. The state of New Zealand has one dependent territory, Tokla. At the same time, New Zealand is the main dick of the Kingdom New Zealand, one of 16 kingdoms of the Commonwealth. Unlike other kingdoms of the Commonwealth, the Kingdom of New Zealand isn't a state and has no international state recognition. The term Kingdom of New Zealand has the conceptual, symbolical character indicating unity of history and moral values of various countries, states and territories and recognition of the uniform head of state. Besides directly New Zealand, also the Cook Islands, Tokla, Niue and the Antarctic territory of Ross are a part of the kingdom. The Cook Islands and Niue are the independent states which are freely associated with New Zealand. Tokla, the dependent territory under the administration of New Zealand. Its territory was transferred under management of New Zealand of Great Britain in 1923, and since 1961 de facto New Zealand meets terms of the contract about Antarctica, according to which Antarctica is the international territory which isn't belonging to any state. Residents of all states and territories entering the kingdom are citizens of New Zealand. New Zealand ensures safety of member states of the kingdom and represents their interests on the international scene. The monarch of New Zealand is the official head of all states and territories of the kingdom. The Cook Islands became the dependent territory of New Zealand in June 1901 as a result of the annexation, which got approval of Parliament of New Zealand in September-October 1900. Direct control of New Zealand was exercised up to 1965, when under the auspices of the Union the country became on the way of self-determination. On the basis of the adopted constitution of the country, the Cook Islands are self-governed and freely associated with New Zealand. New Zealand keeps obligations for safety of the Cook Islands, but any military intervention is possible only on the basis of the decision of the government of the Cook Islands. New Zealand also keeps obligations for the International Representative Office of Interests of the Cook Islands, but now the Cook Islands have as well own diplomatic missions in 20 countries of the world. Tokla was turned into management of New Zealand in 1926 from Great Britain, which annexed islands for 10 years before. Now it is not self-governed territory under administrative control of New Zealand. In 2006 and 2007 this status of islands was supported with results of referenda. But, according to charters of the Union, Tokla and New Zealand continue to conduct works on creation of conditions for transition to full self-determination of Tokla as independent state, and in 2005 Tokla and New Zealand created the Contract on Free Association and developed the draft of future constitution of Tokla. Since 2003 Tokla independently conducts all operations with the state budget. On the international scene, New Zealand represents the interests of Tokla, but the territory also has own representations in a number of the international organizations. I became now the dependent territory of New Zealand in 1901. In 1975, as a result of the referendum held under the auspices of the Union, the country gained independence, and since then, according to provisions of own constitution, is the self-governed state in free association with New Zealand. Though New Zealand kept obligations for representation of the international interests of Nauru, nevertheless, in practice of Nauru independently represents the interests on the international scene and independently participates in work of the international organizations. New Zealand bears responsibility for safety of Nauru. The Constitution of Nauru provides need for New Zealand of rendering the economic help to the country, and New Zealand is the largest donor of the state budget of Nauru. In 2006 and 2007 financial years of Nauru began to administer independently the state budget, but in 2008 the budget almost completely lost receipts, except receipts from the economic help of other states. Ross's territory turned into management of New Zealand in 1923 from Great Britain. Borders of these territories were defined then, and the lands and islands including a part of Victoria Land, an ice shelf of Ross Island, Baleni, Scott and Roosevelt entering them are stipulated. On the basis of a number of the state acts, New Zealand extends the jurisdiction to Ross's territory and limits waters around her as own exclusive economic zone. Nevertheless, after signing in 1961 of the Antarctic Treaty, recognized existence of territorial claims of a number of the states for lands and waters of Antarctica, but not resolved these claims and limiting emergence of new claims such. New Zealand de facto observes the international status of the continent and limits the jurisdiction only to the territory of own Antarctic station or the citizens who are on the continent. Scientific bases: Scott Bays, New Zealand, and McMurdo, USA. The only year-round manned inhabited bases in this territory. According to a census of 2013, the population of New Zealand makes 4.242 million people, and by estimates of 2016, 4.742 million people. The main part of the population of the country is made by New Zealanders of the European origin, generally descendants of natives of Great Britain. There are considerable diasporas of Dutches, Germans, Croats, white South Africans. According to a population census of 2013, the total share of the population of the European origin makes about 74% of the general population of the country. Representatives of indigenous people, Maori, make about 14.9% of the population. Two following largest ethnic groups, representatives of the Asian and Polynesian people, make 11.8% and 7.4% of the population of the country respectively. Arabs, Latin Americans, Africans and other -2.9%. When carrying out a census of the person of the mixed origin can specify two ethnic groups. Average age of residents of the country for 2013 was about 38 years. In 2006, more than 500 people aged lived in the country 100 years or more senior. The same year, the population share aged up to 15 years made 21.5%. Increase in population in 2007 was 0.95%. The general coefficient of birth rate the same year made 13.61 births on 1,000 people of the population, and the general mortality rate -7.54 death on 1,000 people of the population. The most part of New Zealanders constantly, or for a long time, lives outside the country. The largest New Zealand diaspora lives in Australia. In 2014, the number of the New Zealanders living in Australia was about card people. And in Great Britain, In 2001 about 5,000 people. At the same time about 17% of New Zealanders have either the British citizenship or the right for his receiving. Traditionally, the New Zealanders living out of the country support close contacts with the homeland, and many of them deservedly were among outstanding representatives of the country. According to a population census of 2013. Is she part of the population? 47.65% professed Christianity. In 2001 such there were 58.92%. The most widespread denominations of Christianity in the country are Catholicism of a Latin ceremony -12. 61%, Anglicanism -11.79%, Presbyterianism -8.47% and Methodism -2.64%. In the country work small groups of Salvation Army, Seventh-day Adventist Church, the Assemblies of God. Followers of the Buddhism 1.50%. Hinduism 2.11%. And Islam 1.18%. Make the following largest religious communities of New Zealand. About 92% of the population of the country during the census didn't associate themselves with religion. In 2001 such there were 29.64%. 0.01% of residents of the country adhere to any new religious exercises. New Age 0.02% Satanism. It is more adherents of neo-paganism in New Zealand than Jews. Followers of Judaism for 2013 there were 0.18%. As of 2019, by estimates of the Union, 1.1 million immigrants and their descendants are 22.3% of the population of the country lived in New Zealand. The natives of Polynesia who began settling of earlier deserted islands of New Zealand presumably in 1250-1300, created a basis for a formation of the original people and the unique culture of Maori. The first meeting of Maori and Europeans took place in 1642 when the ship of the Dutch seafarer Abel Tasman approached the coast of New Zealand. The next meeting took place only in 1769 when James Cook's expedition approached the east coast. Total number of Maori was, presumably, about card people at this time. By 1800 the European ships began to visit New Zealand rather often, and by 1830 about 200 Europeans already lived in New Zealand. Their situation among Maori was not always equal, many of them were slaves or semi-slaves, but some held also rather high position in hierarchy of tribes. Maori traditionally had no commodity money relations and trade, but practiced barter. They extended this tradition also to a relationship with the European seamen and whalers. The European firearms therefore at the beginning of the 19th century in the country a series of bloody intertribal collisions which received the name Mushketney Wars and continuing with breaks till 1840 broke out became one of the main goods interesting Maori. The intertribal conflicts, acquaintance of Maori to alcoholic beverages and also earlier unknown diseases, generally measles, flu and venereal diseases, considerably reduced these years the number of indigenous people in New Zealand, and in 1896 the number of Maori reached the minimum value in modern history, a little more than 42000 people. In 1840 Great Britain and leaders of tribes of Maori reached the agreement and signed the written contract which received the name Contract Waitangi, according to which provisions Maori gave New Zealand under guardianship of Great Britain, but kept the property rights, and Great Britain acquired the exclusive right to purchase from them of land grounds. During this period there was an active mutual integration of the increasing number of the European immigrants and Maori. Objective trade generally continued to remain the earth belonging to Maori, but began to arise and own business undertakings of Maori gained development. Disagreement in fundamental interpretation of land right between Maori and Europeans, which was aggravated with inaccuracy of formulations of the translation of the contract Waitangi, became one of problems preventing creation of steady mechanisms of sale of land of Maori and determination of its cost. Historically, Maori never sold earlier the land, but leaders of tribes could give it to use of that for someone she was required. It is obvious that such situation cardinally differed from requirements and intentions of the European settlers. All that formed a basis for a series of the armed conflicts between Maori and settlers and parts of the British Army during the period between 1845 and 1872, which received the name the New Zealand Land Wars. More than 2,000 Maori died in these collisions. Confiscation of the country by administration more than 140,000 became result of collisions. Lands of Maori as punishment for the rebellions excited by them. In the early 60s of the 19th century, the number of Maori and Europeans in New Zealand for the first time was approximately equal, about, of each of them. Up to the 20th years of the 20th century, the number of Maori either decreased, or remained at the invariable level, and the number of Europeans quickly grew, and in 1921 was already card people. Despite considerable reduction of the proportional presentability in society, Maori continued to remain in many respects socially independent, though easily adapted to conditions of European civilization. Considerable politicians and businessmen from among Maori began to appear. In 1858, on the basis of specially prepared decree in the country, the system of schools subsidized by the state was opened for children of Maori. In 1865 the system stopped the existence as punishment for land wars, but 2 years was again restored later. Up to 1928 in the country there were separate programs of training for Maori and Europeans, and since 1935 education became obligatory. Up to 15 years. And free. Since 1867 Maori have constantly reserved quota of seats in Parliament of the country, on which election happens separate vote only among Maori. As of 2008, 7 seats in Parliament of the country, from 69, belong to such dicks of Parliament. Also Maori can be elected in Parliament and on the basis of the general vote. In 1900 the state declared creation of the Program for Improvement of Health Care of Maori. In 1928 in the government of the country the first minister of Maori appeared. During World War II, in spite of the fact that the obligatory conscription didn't extend in New Zealand to Maori, a considerable number entered the operating divisions of armed forces of New Zealand as volunteers and were involved in fighting in Egypt, in Italy and in Greece. In the 70th years of the 20th century, active process of an urbanization of Maori began, and since this time the most part Maori lives in the cities. In the 70th years of the same century, in connection with the general improvement of education level of Maori and improvement of their welfare, processes of growth of national consciousness began that resulted in need of recognition of the role of Maori for development and formation of the country. Inland Tinsavil developed its dead decreed in its status of the contract Witandi was adopted and the port of Witandi considering the case is connected with return of lands and other resources and definition of compensations for damage caused to the people of Mari since the period of land wars began to act on the basis since 1977 in the country.
The Court of Waitangi isn't judicial and legal instance, but creates the mechanism of conducting consultations and negotiations between the government of the country and Maori in above the stipulated questions. As of 2008, the sum of the paid compensations was more than 900 million New Zealand dollars. Information of this section is provided according to a population census of New Zealand of 2006. Maori make 14.6% of the population of the country. Their total number minus 565,329 people. In 15 years. 1991-2006. The number of these people in the country grew almost by 30%. About 47% from their number are descendants of mixed marriages, generally with Europeans. 51% of the Maori living in New Zealand men, 49% women. From them 35% children are younger than 15 years. Average age of the Maori living in New Zealand about 23 years. At the same time, average age of women a little more than 24 years, and average age of male population a little more than 21 years. About 87% Maori live on the Northern Island and about 25% live in the city of Auckland or in his suburb. The highest concentration of representatives of these people is observed on the island Chatham. 23% can freely communicate in language of Maori. About 25% don't own them at all. About 4% Maori have university education or above. About 39% of the general population of Maori have full-time employment in the mode of full employment. As of 2008, Maori made about 50% of the people who are in places of detention in the country, and 42% of criminal incidents in the country occur with the assistance of Maori. Maori among all ethnic groups of New Zealand keep the highest unemployment rate and have the lowest life expectancy and the highest incidence. English is the main language of communication, and 96% of the population of the country use them as that.
The majority of books, newspapers and magazines is published on him. He prevails in broadcasting of radio and television.
Language of Maori is the second state language. In 2006, the New Zealand Sign Language received the status of the third state language. The New Zealand option of English is close to Australian, but kept in itself much bigger influence of English of the southern regions of England. At the same time, he gained some characteristics of the Scottish and Irish accent.
The language of Maori had a certain impact on pronunciation, and some words of this language entered daily communication of multinational community of the country.
In addition, in the country there live representatives of 171 more language groups.
The most used languages after English and Maori, the Samoan language, French, Hindi and Chinese. Russian and other Slavic languages are little used in connection with small population for which these languages are a family.
Language of Maori received the status of official language in 1987. His use became obligatory in names of state departments and institutions, and his use without restrictions became possible for employees and visitors of all public services, in courts, in public hospitals, and also in divisions of armed forces. Studying of bases of language of Maori is an obligatory course of school programs, and a number of educational institutions conduct training in 2 languages. Many place names in New Zealand historically kept the roots in language of Maori. Maori, the most southern language of Austronesiski language family. About 150,000 people announced possession of Maori.
In 2006, the New Zealand Sign Language was given the status of the 3rd official language of the country.
The New Zealand Sign Language is the naturally arisen language used by deaf or hearing impaired people for the purpose of communication. The British Sign Language formed its basis, and it is recognized as one of Banzel language dialects. In everyday communication as of 2013, sign language was used by more than 24,000 people.
New Zealand, the developed country with the market system of economy which basis make agriculture, the processing and food industry and tourism.
National economy has export orientation. The main trade partners are Australia, the USA, Japan, China. The gross national product (NPN) of New Zealand made $186.7 billion United States dollars in 2016, occupying on this indicator, by different estimates, 58th-60th place in the world. Income of the state budget minus $54.36 billion.
Income per capita was $26300 United States dollars in 2007, taking on this indicator 21 places in the world.
In December 2014, income per capita was $34910 United States dollars. ENS dollar. Level of annual gain of NPN is 4.8%. The rate of inflation according to 2006 was 3.8%. The external debt of the countries according to 2006 made $59.8 billion US dollars. The 47th place in the world.
That made per capita approximately $11.7 thousand of SHA.
The share of public sector in economy is small. In 2008, under control of the state, there were 19 enterprises and the organizations. The number of the efficient population in the country in 2013, 2.41 million people. The most part from this number, up to 74%, is engaged in services industry. Unemployment rate for December 2014, 5.7%. New Zealand is a DIC of a number of the international and regional economic organizations. Among the most influential, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the World Trade Organization, the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, the International Energy Agency. New Zealand in 2012 headed the rating of the best countries for business made by the American business magazine Forbes. The previous year New Zealand held the second place of the list. Leadership of New Zealand, transparent and stable, the business climate encouraging business provided it explain in Forbes. New Zealand won first place on 4 of 11 indicators which were investigated by employees of Forbes. The country is in the lead in the sphere of personal liberty, protection of the rights of investors, on low levels of bureaucratization and corruption. The monetary system of New Zealand arose only with arrival on these lands of the first Europeans. In earlier times of Maori didn't use money in habitual understanding of this word, preferring to build the economic relationship on the basis of barter exchanges. Till 1840 in the country there was no uniform monetary system and settlers used generally coins of the British stamping. Banknotes were much less widespread in the address. After 1840 the address included private debt obligations and the banknotes issued by private dealers. Such situation developed up to 1881, and totally 48 private dealers for this period released the banknotes and coins.
In 1897 banknotes of Great Britain became the only official currency of the country.
Besides, 6 more banks of the country had the right to release own banknotes. Since 1930 the banknotes introduced into circulation by the Reserve Bank of New Zealand, English Reserve Bank of New Zealand, became the only legal currency of the country. As an example, the British monetary system with division into pounds sterling, shillings and pence began to be used. In 1967 in the address the decimal system with simultaneous issuance of dollars and cents was introduced. Now banknotes of $5, $10, $20, $50 and $100 and coins of $1 and $2 and $10, $20 and 50 cents are in circulation of the country.
New Zealand possesses the adjusted system of banking services constructed on the system of obligatory state licensing of all bank activity.
As of 2009, 19 banks, from which 9 were offices of large international banks, worked in the country.
The organization of bank activity is coordinated by the Reserve Bank of New Zealand, performing functions of the central bank of the country and defining monetary and financial policy of the state.
The main banks of the country have an extensive network of offices in all main settlements of the country. At the same time, offices of Kivabank work at base of post offices of communication. All main banks of the country participate in the interbank FPOS system. Electronic funds transfer at point of sale, providing mutual settlements under payments of credit and debit cards. New Zealand has the international reputation of the country with the effective and advanced agricultural industry. The products of animal industry, especially dairy livestock production and sheep breeding, gardenings, winemaking and wine growing, forestry became one of the main articles of national economy. Research and modern technologies play an important role in steady competitiveness of the New Zealand agricultural products and great demand on her in the international market. The industrial livestock of sheep made more than 40 million heads in 2005. Number of cattle minus 8.6 million heads, from them 4.2 million heads, dairy herd. The farmer livestock of deer made the same year 1.6 million heads. The structure of the agricultural industry of New Zealand is in many respects unique for the developed countries. Her main feature is the lack of any grants from the state to farms.
It causes the necessity for producers and exporters of agricultural products independently to compete with the colleagues from other making countries, in many of which the agricultural industry traditionally uses subsidies of the state. In this regard, New Zealand persistently speaks at the international economic forums and especially within the UPO for introduction of a general regime of control of processes of the state financial supports of the agricultural branches of economy in all making countries.
Control of development and functioning of agriculture of the country carries out the Ministry of Agriculture and the Forest Industry. However, such control isn't restrictive. All agriculture of New Zealand exists and develops on the principles of free economy.
Industrial fishing plays a large role both in life of New Zealanders and in development of national economy. It in many respects defines importance for New Zealand of her 200-mile exclusive economic zone, which is the basis for fishers of the country.
In 2002, the economy of sea economy gave $3 billion or more than 3% of the size NINIP. In 2006, only export of fresh-caught fish and seafood made $1.3 billion. Production of marine resources is carried out on the basis of the evidence-based norms of quoting determined by the state and distributed among the national fishing companies. A part of quotas for commercial production belongs to Maori. For performance of the quota catch, the New Zealand companies often charter the fishing and overworking fleet of other countries, most often Ukraine, Russia, China. Fishers of the country conduct commercial production more than 130 species of fish and other marine resources. Most among them are important New Zealand, the Lutinous, Hoplost, a squid, Bolshepuri, a hake, a spiny lobster and some other. About 90% of the got fish and seafood intend for export. Agricultural production, industrial fishing, the food and forest industry are the basis of the economy of the country and in many respects define also the direction of development of industrial production. The food industry, the largest industry on employment and branching of infrastructure in economy of New Zealand. Total volumes of products of the food industry are about 10% of NIPINI, and export of products of the food industry about $15 billion. Distinctive feature of the country is also almost total absence of the large industrial enterprises and branches of the heavy industry.
At the same time, in the country there are about companies which are engaged in production of industrial output for various sectors of the economy.
The big share of production is directed to export. The industrial companies generate in general about 15% of NIPINI. The main number of industrial production is aimed at providing requirements of the motor transport, aircraft and defense industry and also at production of electronic products and in high-tech industry. Biotechnological production, especially agricultural biotechnologies and pharmacological technologies, is traditional for New Zealand. Its annual volume is about $800 million. Power branch of economy of New Zealand use oil and gas products is the cornerstone of the electric power and geothermal energy. Due to the nuclear-free status of the country, the nuclear power in New Zealand isn't used, and plans of her emergence don't exist. Total power indicators of gas production in New Zealand are approximately 200 petajoule.
Total power indicators of oil production are 38 petajoule. Oil production in the country considerably decreases in recent years, and the amount of the imported oil product steadily grows, having been in 2004 totally about 300 petajoule.
Coal mining in New Zealand makes in total power indicators approximately 140 petajoule, according to 2006. About a third of the extracted coal is sent for export. Geothermal energy is actively used.
From 129 known geothermal zones in New Zealand, 36 zones with water temperatures from 70 to 220 degrees have industrial value.
Geothermal steam is used in a number of industrial and agricultural productions, but its main volume is used for power production. Such as use gives not less than 7%.
2.7 billion UW.
From the total amount of the electric power developed in the country.
The general electricity generation in the country in indicators of 2006 was 41.5 billion UH.
At the same time, the greatest number of the electric power,
56%, more than 23 billion UW,
were produced on hydroelectric power stations. Gas and coal became the sources of receiving the electric power following on importance. With their use in 2006, it was developed according to 21.3% and 13.1% of the total amount of the electric power, 8.8 billion UH and 5.4 billion UH respectively. Alternative sources of power production are presented by wind stations. In 2006 they gave 1.5% of total amounts. The country continues to develop actively wind power, having doubled in 2007 the generating volumes of wind power farms in comparison with indicators of 2006. In 2008, 8 wind power farms worked in the country. 11 new farms are at different stages of construction or design.
The geographical isolation of New Zealand, limitation of own industrial base and remoteness are from the main world markets forced to pay much attention to foreign trade and the international economic cooperation throughout all history of her development.
By various estimates, not less than 20% of the products made in the country are intended for export. According to 2006, the total amount of export of New Zealand was nearly $33 billion. Hereinafter in this section a figure are brought in New Zealand dollars. An import volume the same year exceeded $37 billion. The primary export branches of national economy, it is traditionally considered to be agriculture, fishery and processing of seafood, forestry and wood industry. More than a half of export revenue of the country falls to the share of these industries. Dairy products make not less than 18% of the total amount of export, not less than 14% fall to the share of export of wool, and the share of products of forestry and wood processing makes not less than 4% of total amount of export of New Zealand. The greatest share of import to the country was made by oil and fuel products. Consumers of the country spent more than $3.1 billion for such purchases. Coals became the second largest niche of import of the country in recent years, attracting $3.1 billion in a total amount of import. Further import of the aircraft equipment with annual costs not less than $1.7 billion of them follows. The main trade partners of the country are Australia. Trade volume with this country is, according to 2005, $6.1 billion. The USA, $4.2 billion according to the same data. Japan, $3.3 billion. Not less than 70% of export from New Zealand are the share of the countries of eights. New Zealand signed a number of free trade agreements. The first agreement of this sort was concluded in 1966 with Australia later. In 1983, the agreement was expanded. Australia-New Zealand Closer Economic Relations Trade Agreement. Since 2001, a similar agreement works with Singapore. New Zealand and Singapore Closer Economic Partnership. In 2005, the Free Trade Agreement was concluded with Thailand. New Zealand and Thailand Closer Economic Partnership.
The same year, the similar quadrilateral agreement on character was concluded with Brunei, Chile and Singapore.
Trans-Pacific Strategic Economic Partnership. In 2008, the first among the developed countries, New Zealand concluded the Free Trade Agreement with China. Trade and economic relations between New Zealand and the Russian Federation, and also other countries of the former USSR, is still insignificant and significantly concede to commodity turnover volume between the USSR and New Zealand. In 2007, commodity turnover was $97.2 million United States dollars. In 2008, $149 million United States dollars.
At the same time, in 2008, from total amount in $149 million the Russian export made $5.2 million, and import of New Zealand minus $143.8 million. Since 2006, the market of New Zealand was entered by the Russian company Nutritech, which acquired the equity stake of the local producer of New Zealand Dairies Limited Dairy Products and investing in the enterprise of $115 million United States dollars. The sphere of tourism and the industries accompanying it become more and more important elements of economy of New Zealand every year. The location of the country and beauty of her nature in combination with the high level of service, convenience of transport structures and development of active programs of involvement of tourists to the country favor to it.
Now tourism creates not less than 10% of GDP of the country. In the sphere of tourism, nearly 18,000 enterprises work, and they create about 10% of jobs in the country. In 2006, the country was visited by the number of tourists, record for all her history minus card people. At the same time, on average each tourist was in the country of 20 days, and they totally spent more than $6.5 billion in New Zealand. The main number of tourists is made by residents of Australia. Considerably, the number of tourists grew up from the People's Republic of China lately, and they made the second in total group of the international tourists who visited the country in 2006. Further tourists follow from the USA, Germany, South Korea, Japan.
In relation to citizens of the Russian Federation and the CIS countries, New Zealand observes quite rigid visa regime.
The average term of consideration of documents by Immigration Service of New Zealand minus 14 calendar days. In certain cases and depending on a season, this term can be reduced or increased. If the trip is planned in November-January, documents on the visa have to be filed at least in 1.5 months prior to date of departure.
Development of transport and transport infrastructure is one of economic priorities of the country throughout all history of her development.
It is connected, first of all, with rather low population density in rather large territory and considerable distances between settlements. The structure of the transport system within the country is under construction on the basis of network of the state high-speed highways, including more than 100 automobile highways. The state organization Transit New Zealand manages this network. The main transport artery of the country, route ends passing on all length of Northern and Southern Islands from the north on the south.
Total length of highways of the country is more than 92000 km.
Extent of railway lines of the country is 3898 km. About 500 km are electrified. The national system of the railroads is operated by the state organization On-Track. In 1993, the railroads of the country were privatized. Due to the difficult economic situation in 2003, the government of New Zealand agreed to take them under own control again, and in 2008 the government completely redeemed network of the railroads and ferries, thereby having renationalized them. Internal waterways of the country lost the former importance as transport arteries, but also to this day 1609 km are suitable and are partially used for river navigation. Severny Island and South Island are connected among themselves by the direct ferry which is regularly transporting passengers and freights. A part of the used ferries is adapted for transportation of railway cars and cars. Historically great importance for national economy is made by seaports. Now ports work with container terminals in Auckland, Torrange, Wellington, Dunedin and Napier. Port Puncta work in Whangarei, Gisborne, New Plymouth, Nelson, Picton, Tomorrow and Bluff. 3 more bays are incidentally used for the parking of vessels and insignificant cargo handling. 6 river ports, not players as, are an important transport role also work today in the country. Despite the importance of sea transportations, New Zealand has very small amount of heavy tonnage sea vessels.
It is caused by opening in 1994 of coasting transportations for the international sea companies and objective impossibility of shipping companies of New Zealand to compete with them.
In the country 113 airports and airfields work.
The largest of them is the airport of Auckland, accepting about 11 million passengers a year.
Not less than 70% of passengers arrive in New Zealand through him.
The following on the importance and volumes of transportations are the airports Wellington and Christchurch, accepting about 4 million passengers annually.
National airline of New Zealand is the Air New Zealand company with the main airport of basing in Auckland.
Planes of this company make regular flights to 11 countries of the world, and participation of the company in the international partner programs allows her passengers to reach without effort almost any point of the world.
4 of her subsidiaries, Air Nelson, Eagle Airways, Mount Cook Airline and Freedom Air, carry out the main number of freight and passenger air transportation within the country. Transport pipelines are used in New Zealand slightly. Pipelines are laid for gas transportation. About 1,000 kilometers. Transportation of oil products. 160 kilometers. And liquefied gas. 150 kilometers. Among cars at the end of the old years in New Zealand, the Japanese foreign cars prevailed. New Zealand, being a full participant of the international financial market, actively participates in world investment processes. Australia and the USA are the most important financial partners of the country.
According to 2006, the total volume of the current investments of businessmen of these countries into economy of New Zealand was approximately $110 billion.
Hereinafter in this section a figure are brought in New Zealand dollars. That made nearly a half of total amount of foreign investments.
Great Britain, Switzerland and Singapore became the following on the volume of the general current investments into the country, having invested totally more than $20 billion.
The most popular areas for foreign investments into economy of New Zealand are projects in the field of finance and insurance. The volume of investment of foreign businessmen into New Zealand in 2006 was $19.5 billion. At the same time, the New Zealand businessmen invested the same year only $10.7 billion in foreign projects. Owing to the geographic location, New Zealand throughout all the modern history paid attention to development of communication systems. In 1840 the post service began to work in the country, and in 1862 the first cable line connecting the city of Christchurch with one of neighbouring settlements was laid. In 1865 the cable message was laid between Northern and Southern Islands, and in 1872 cable communication connected two largest cities of the country, Wellington and Auckland. Laying of an underwater cable to Australia in 1876 for the first time connected lines of communication of New Zealand, both with Australia, and through her with the countries of Asia and Europe. In 1877 in the country the first phone line appeared. Since 1906 radio stations began to work. In 1939 by the number of radio receivers per capita the country came to the second place in the world, after the USA. In 1960 in the country the first television station appears. Since 1971 in the system of civil communications in New Zealand satellites began to be used. In 1985 all higher educational institutions of the country were connected in uniform computer network, and in 1986 the New Zealand national domain appeared. In 1993 the country got continuous access to a system, the Internet. As of 2009 in the country
245 million cell phones are used, and the network of cable telephone communication covers about 99% of houses of the country.
In the country 41 telebroadcasting stations work. 3.36 million New Zealanders constantly use services of the Internet. 3 mobile operators which use 1xf2 Ganzam CPay, -2 degrees, Vodafone and Telecom Act in the country.
In 2009 in New Zealand 986 post offices processing about 1 billion mailings annually worked.
The optical communication lines laid on a seabed. Tasman -2 capacity GUPS. It is put into operation 1992. Australia, New Zealand. Southern Cross Cable Network. SCN. Capacity -TTAPS. It is put into operation in 2000. Approximate potential capacity greater than 12 TTAPS. Australia, New Zealand, Fiji Islands, Hawaiian Islands, North America. Tasman Global Express capacity -30 TTAPS. It is put into operation 2015. Australia, New Zealand. APSI East capacity -TTAPS. It is put into operation 2015. Australia, New Zealand, North America. Hawaii cable, capacity -25 TTAPs. Putting into operation, the second quarter 2018. In the project, an emphasis on communication with North America. Also provides communication with Australia, American Samoa, the Hawaiian Islands. In the country, more than 1 million walking, sailing yachts and boats are registered. Navigation is possible all the year round. The yacht industry enjoys support of the government. Number of specialists of this industry, over 1,000 people. Total number of the companies united within Marine Industry Association ends, over 500, and their gross annual product in 2008 exceeded the level of €1 billion. Unlike all other countries where fight for the most prestigious sailing trophy in the world, the Cup of America is business of individuals. In New Zealand it became the national idea and laid the foundation for the yacht industry. New Zealanders, the legislators of trends recognized in the world in construction of megayachts.
On the 21st of January 2018, New Zealand started the carrier rocket of the Easy-class Electron with 2 satellites from the starting Rocket Lab Launch Complex 1 complex constructed on the peninsula of Makia'en, which is on the east coast of the northern island of New Zealand. And the modern culture of New Zealand, traditions and cultural influence of the people inhabiting the British Isles, and the cultural principles inherent in most of the Western European people which representatives in this at that time moved to New Zealand are still of particular importance. At the same time, influence of cultural traditions of the Polynesian people is traditional. Among the last traditions of Maori and also in the last decades natives of Fiji, Samoa are strongest. Tonga make the contribution to development of the Polynesian directions in the culture of the country. In the last 25 years, in connection with strengthening of immigration processes, the contribution of representatives of the people of Asia to creation of uniform and polychromatic culture of New Zealand increased. Preservation and development of national culture of Maori is one of country priorities. Still half a century ago, language of Maori almost ceased to be used in daily communication. Today one of channels of national television broadcasts only in this language, newspapers are issued, books are published. Work of public authorities in issues of cultural development of the country and society is coordinated by the Ministry of Culture and Historical Heritage. The culture of Maori before arrival of Europeans had no writing, therefore literary creativity in New Zealand began to develop rather late. Maori quickly acquired writing as information transmission medium, and their many oral legends and poems were transferred to a written form. From 1930 years the New Zealand literature began to depart more and more from global trends to a local perspective, but her wide popularity began to grow only from the middle of the 20th century, with increase in number of local publishing houses. A traditional genre of the New Zealand literature are the story and the short story. The most famous authors, Catherine Mansfield and Janet Frame. Dunedin is the literary city of UNESCO. In spite of the fact that shootings of movies began in New Zealand in the 1920th years, the film industry gained active development only since 70th years of the same century. Every year the number of the films shot in the country, or created with participation of the New Zealand cinematographers increases. Trilogies, Lord of the Rings and Hobbit movies, Last Samurai, Chronicles of Narnia became world famous. Left Sorcerer and Magic Case, Chronicles of Narnia.
Prince Caspian, Xena is the Queen of Soldiers, and a number of others. Among bright representatives of the New Zealand film industry, it is necessary to mark out the film director Peter Jackson, the screenwriter and the film director Jane Campion, the screenwriter, the film director and the actor Taika Waititi, actors Tamara Morrison, Craig Parker, Sam Neill and Russell Crowe, actresses Keishia Castle-Hughes and Lucy Lawless. The photo in New Zealand developed similar to other colonies. In the first years of existence of the photo, New Zealand, in view of geographical remoteness, lacked for photographic materials. However, pioneers of photo art left a set of pictures, in particular, a significant amount of photos of Maori. In the first half of the 20th century, in the photo of the country, pictorialism and social realism prevailed.
In the 21st century, in connection with universal distribution of ultra-compact cameras, photo art was democratized and became available all segments of the population. During the Dover-Paesky period of development of New Zealand, the only form of architectural architecture were the Polynesian traditions kept and developed in the culture of Maori.
Besides premises, the only forms of buildings during this period were buildings for the general collecting the tribe, Maori of Maori, and serf strengthenings. Have the uniform architecture and carved jewelry characteristic of all people of Maori, and extremely slightly differed in certain tribes. The beginning of the European development of the country was followed by construction development. As the most part of the population of the time was made by natives of Great Britain, it is quite natural that in the construction they initially adhered to the British architectural school.
However, already in the 19th century, and especially in the first half of the 20th century, the pronounced New Zealand architectural style, therefore even the earliest New Zealand constructions, have essential stylistic differences not only from the British structures of the time, but also from the Australian, began to develop. As the reason for that in many respects served the remoteness of the country and low population density that did extremely difficult financing of construction of any large objects or buildings.
The abundance of a stone, suitable for construction, allowed to refuse already at early stages of development of the country use of a tree in construction.
One of the most interesting architectural monuments of the country is building of the central part of the city of Napier.
Destroyed by an earthquake in 1931, the city was restored and built up in architectural style of Art Deco characteristic for those times, remains in an invariable look about one today, and is an object of World Cultural Heritage of UNESCO.
The most known example of modern New Zealand architecture and construction technologies is the television tower built in 1997 in Auckland Sky Tower.
Height of a tower is 328 m and as of May 2007 this highest building of the Southern Hemisphere. Historically, art of Maori carried generally religious sense. His main directions were wood carving or bones, weaving, music and dances, and a tattoo. The first book was published in language of Maori in 1840, and the first newspaper began to be issued in 1900. Due to the lack of writing before the European contact, wood carving became for Maori a peculiar substitute, and stories and legends of the people often were transferred in the represented scenes. Till this day, Maori traditions of reading history some kind of according to carved images remained.
Outwattled coverings to a tuk-tuk were most often used as one of the few jewelry in premises and also for the cult and religious purposes in rooms for the general collecting tribes. The tattoo or dagmoko is one of the most ancient cultural traditions of Maori which came to their history on the first steps of development of the people. During long-time existence was a symbol of the social status, and people of the lower social group had no right to have a tattoo on the face, though tattoo elements on a body could be allowed them.
For men, drawing on a face, buttocks and hips was considered as traditional. The tattoo could be applied to women on lips and cheeks. The tattoo could be applied to both men and women and on other parts of a body, but in that case it had smaller value. In recent years the popularity increased again, and now hair drawing often is a tribute to the ancestors and the traditions for Maori. At the same time, elements became popular and representatives of other ethnic groups have population of New Zealand and even abroad. Haku's cap, one of the most significant elements of culture of Maori, including the system of the dances, a mimicry and movements accompanied with singing. Dancing traditions of a cap of Hak include several directions: give to drink. Ngauri of Po. The dance better known in the world as one of types of juggling by balls on ropes today, and Hak. Ngauri of Haka. The dance which became known in the world thanks to performances of the New Zealand national team in rugby of All Blacks. Hak entered everyday life and is a tribute of the state and public ceremonies. Army and naval divisions of Armed Forces of New Zealand have own versions kaki. Many sports clubs use the versions adapted for themselves. In 2006 in the country 20 daily newspapers were issued. The largest among them is New Zealand Herald, published with a circulation more than card copies. Besides, in the country 126 more newspapers, the majority of which belongs to public organizations and individuals, are issued. In 2006 in the country about 230 magazines were issued. The Skywatch and New Zealand Women's Day magazines are the largest. Their circulations, more than card and card copies respectively. The largest television company of the country is National Television New Zealand. The company conducts broadcasting on two national channels, TV1 and TV. Programs are kept 24 hours a day within 7 days a week.
Broadcasting is available almost in all territory of the country.
With financial support of the state in 2006, the company also began transfers of new Freeview TV channel, free and free from advertising.
For development and maintenance of national language of Maori, the Maori Television TV channel on which transfers are conducted mainly in Maori works in the country. In the country, two independent telebroadcasting, the Sky Television and HD Media companies, also work.
The first specializes in broadcasting of satellite digital channels, the second broadcasts on TV and C channels. National State Radio began the programs in the early 30s, and the first independent private radio stations began to appear in the country only in the 1968 years.
National broadcasting is carried out by Radio New Zealand. Te Reo Irarangi o Aotearoa
is in their management. 3 national networks: National, Concert and AM Network. New Zealand State Station International Veshinio Radio New Zealand International. News channels: Radio New Zealand News and Current Affairs. National Audio Archive. The largest independent radio company is New FM, operated by National Pacific Radio Trust.
Programs of the company are available to reception in areas of residence more than 85% of the population of the country. The radio channel of Maori Radio conducts the transfers in language of Maori and is created in 1989 for maintenance of development and preservation of language of these people.
21 radio stations work on this channel, all of them belong to various tribes of Maori. In general, in the country, about 200 other independent radio stations work. Ernest Rutherford, founder of modern nuclear physics and one of the most famous scientists of New Zealand. Royal Society of New Zealand. Royal Society of New Zealand is National Academy of Sciences and unites in the ranks about 60 independent research and technological centers. Royal Research Institutes. Crown Research Institutes. A state organization created in 1992, uniting 9 research centers, areas of researchers, working in vital for the country, is the largest research association of the country.
Works in the field of scientific research and introduction of research developments are coordinated at the national level by the Ministry of Researches, Sciences and Technologies. The state costs of development of science and research is made about 0.5% of NPNI in 2005 financial year. The state expenses make about 11% of the total amount of science funding, technology and development in national economy.
For New Zealand medical researchers, biology, biochemistry, agricultural researches and forestry, engineering and social sciences, the Antarctic researches are traditionally priority. The largest astronomical observatory in New Zealand is the University Observatory Mount John. Despite the short history of the European development of New Zealand, the first museum in the country, he was educated in 1852.
One of the largest museums of the country existing to this day, the Auckland Military and Historical Museum of
Auckland War Memorial Museum became it. The largest museum of the country is the National Museum of New Zealand, located in Wellington now, Te Whātau, better known under the name. The history of this museum began in 1865, but in a modern look the museum was opened for public in 1998. Annually he accepts about 1.3 million visitors. The small museums with the expositions telling about the history of certain regions, cities and settlements, and also with expositions to the devoted development of separate types of the industry or certain areas of science, exist almost in all cities of the country. Many of such museums belong to private owners or are financed by public organizations and local governments. More than 1.3 million New Zealanders, 31% of the population, visit the museums annually. The largest library of the country is the National Library of New Zealand, founded in 1858. The developed network of libraries exists in all cities and large settlements of the country. The system of the mobile libraries visiting these or those sparsely populated or remote settlements is also popular. Most libraries is financed by local governments and charitable contributions. About 40% of the population of the country constantly use services of libraries. The sport traditionally plays an important role in life of New Zealanders. In many respects till this day, keeping traditions of immigrants from the British Isles, the national sport of New Zealand by right can be considered rugby. The national team in rugby. All Blacks.
Wins first place in the international rating of the national teams and has the best ratio of the won and lost games among all national teams of the world in this sport.
For many years the team admits to the strongest in the world. In the country more than 140,000 registered players united in 520 clubs, and more than 2,000 judges of this game. The New Zealand School of Run was included into World Elite in the late 50s, the beginning of the 1960th years. Olympic champions Peter Snell and Murray Halberg together with their trainer Arthur Lydiard. Lydiard's ideas were adopted by many trainers worldwide.
Under the influence of the promotional ideas of Lydiard in Auckland in 1961 jogging, which led to world running boom in the 1970th years arose.
Athletes of New Zealand regularly participate in the Olympic Games. Since 1920 the national team participates in Summer Games, and since 1952 in Winter. Athletes of New Zealand won at the Olympic Games more than 110 awards, including more than 45 gold. Oarsmen achieved the greatest Olympic progress. The canoeist Ian Ferguson, only of New Zealanders, won 4 gold and 1 silver at Games 1984 and 1988 of years, and his workmate Paul MacDonald won 3 gold, 1 silver and 1 bronze. 3 Olympic gold in 1960 and 1964 on the account of the glorified runner Peter Snell. Among women it is possible to mark out the 4-time world champion Barbara Kendall, who won at the Olympic Games gold 1992, silver 1996, and bronze medals 2000 in windsurfing competitions. Tokatelnitsa Valerie Adams won Colonel's 2 in a row gold at the Olympic Games 2008 and 2012 of years. Traditionally important event in sports life of the country are Commonwealth Games. In 1950 and 1990 these games were held in Auckland. Christchurch and Wellington act as some of applicants for holding games in 2018. National Team of New Zealand, one of 6 other national teams presented at all held games. During games of the Commonwealth the team of New Zealand won 525 medals. From them 124 gold, 167 silver and 234 bronze. New Zealanders achieved serious success in world motorsport. Bruce McLaren in 1960 became the vice world champion of Formula One, and McLaren, one of the most successful auto racing for all history, based the famous racing team subsequently.
And Danny Hulme in 1967 became the first New Zealand world champion of Formula One.
Also Chris Amon treated the leading racers of F in 1960, the 1970th years. The New Zealand crew is a part of Bruce McLaren and Chris Amon in 1966 24 Hours of Le Mans driving Ford D won the most prestigious race. In 1995, 2003 and 2017 crews of the New Zealand Black Magic yachts. The team leader Sir Peter Blake. Team New Zealand and Emirates Team New Zealand became winners of the Cup of America, one of the regattas most known in the world. Finals of the 36th Cup of America will be held in March 2021 in Auckland. It is possible to carry Sea Bank Arena in Wellington. 4650 places. To number of the largest covered sports arenas of New Zealand, Westpac Arena in Christchurch. 90 places. Vector Arena in Auckland. 12000 places. North Harbour Stadium N in North Shore. 25000 places. Waikato Stadium N in Hamilton. 25800 places. Rotorua International Stadium N in Rotorua. 30000 places. Wellington Regional Stadium N in Wellington. 34500 places. Forsyth Bar Stadium N in Dunedin. 36000 places. Eden Park in Auckland. 60000 places. For carrying out in 2011 in Auckland of the World Cup in rugby, it was planned to build the stadium with a capacity up to 60000 places, largest in the country. The planned stadium already received the name Stadium New Zealand. But as a result, the City Council decided to modernise Eden Park Stadium, having increased its capacity to 60000 places. In recent years, especially among young people, more and more popular is a soccer.
Among the population of New Zealand aged up to 17 years, about 18% in 2006 gave preference active occupation the sport.
An active holiday, it is necessary to carry golf, cricket, tennis, a netball to other popular sports. The most popular female sport in the country. Swimming. The legislation of New Zealand defines national holidays and memorable days and also regional memorable days. All national holidays are obligatory days off for the working population of the country and pupils.
Regional memorable days celebrate. These are those dates in the history of certain regions and the cities of the country and can be the days off in the celebrating areas.
In case Christmas or New Year drop out on the day off, workers who have days off, the days off receive additional day off on Monday. It is possible to carry the Mother's Day, the second Sunday of May, and Day of Fathers, the first Sunday of September, to number of important general celebrations. Holidays. New Year's celebration on January 1-2. Day of Waitangi on February 6. Good Friday, the last Friday before Easter revival. Easter Sunday according to the church calendar. Monday of the Bright Week, the first Monday after Easter Sunday. Put Anzac on April 25. Birthday of the Queen on June 7 in 2010. Labor Day, the fourth Monday of October. Christmas on December 25. Day of Gifts on December 26. National symbols of the country are known under the collective name Kivian. They can be divided into geographical, natural, military, political, and cultural. The location of the country in the Southern Hemisphere is designated on the New Zealand flag by the constellation the Southern Cross. The mountain system, the Southern Alps, became a symbol of New Zealand in the 19th century, next century having conceded to beaches. The developed livestock production made one of symbols of the country of sheep, gumboots and a wire used in protections. The standard national symbols of the country are birds of a kiwi, Apterigiformes, and a plant silvery, Cyathea dealbata, known in the New Zealand dialect as a silvery fern. The symbolical image of his escapes in the form of a spiral called bark was created by Maori and adopted by Europeans. The bird of a kiwi is so popular that gave the name to fruits of one of plants of a type of Actinidia Chinese. Actinidia, who is grown up in New Zealand and exported to many countries of the world in the 1950th years, and now these fruit are better known under the name of a kiwi.
Besides the kiwi,
became daily used self-name and the international national nickname of New Zealanders.
The died-out bird of Moa also is kiwiini, though after the end of the colonial period the popularity of a kiwi became above.
Along with the image of a bird of a kiwi, the image of a silvery fern enjoy popularity and are often used in graphics of the New Zealand national brands and logos, including currency.
The headdress of the New Zealand soldiers, a field hat N, is a symbol of military victories of the country.
Historical influence of Great Britain is reflected by Presence Jack's Union in a flag and the Queen Elizabeth on national currency. The personified Zealand N was a country symbol at the beginning of the 20th century. Culinary traditions of New Zealand were in many respects created on the basis of the isolated geographical location of the country, causing restriction of food base, and existence of considerable marine resources throughout the whole historical stage.
Formation of traditions was also influenced by the demographic nature of the European settling of the country, generally representatives of the people of the British Isles. The great influence on formation of the general for the country of culinary culture during the period after the 70th years of the 20th century was caused by culinary traditions of new immigrants from the countries of Asia, generally China and India. The cuisine of modern New Zealand combines in the basis the international culinary schools with a great influence of traditional British cuisine.
Among the most popular dishes there are still fish and French fries, Pavlov's cake, and also peculiar and widespread in the basic meat pie in Australia and New Zealand.
Influence of the New Zealand cuisine on world culinary traditions is insignificant, though the products of the New Zealand winemakers received noticeable popularity in the world.
Dishes of traditional cuisine of Maori are almost not presented in an everyday diet of New Zealanders, though some products, the famous Maori, for example sweet potato, became widespread among all population, and Maori use traditional hang food at meetings. The education system in New Zealand includes preschool institutions, childhood services, free primary and secondary school education, primary and secondary education, and the higher education system, tertiary education, with equal access to her for all New Zealanders. The system of preschool education covers the period of life of the child to 6-year age. Preschool institutions in New Zealand don't belong to the state and enter the sector of private business. On average, up to 60% of children of preschool age visits children's education centers. School education covers children from 5-year age and it is obligatory for children aged from 6 up to 16 years.
All schools provide education in English. Several specialized schools educate with primary teaching in language of Maori. At the same time, language of Maori is an obligatory subject of studying at elementary schools, and at most schools of the country there are specialized programs of training for persons interested to study in language of Maori. Education at schools meets the standard international standards of training with recognition of the New Zealand School Certificate of NC level in one relevant standards shown to the British General Certificate of Secondary Education, the Canadian and American Grade 10. The higher education system covers all sector of after-school vocational training and training.
Now in the country 36 open highest education centers, including 8 universities, 21 institutes of technology. English Institute of Technologies and Polytechnical Education Center. English Polytechnic. Work.
Besides 46 training centers and 895 private educational institutions, most of which part is made by the Centers of Studying of English for Foreign Students work.
In the country it is developed in the system of the Correspondence Education Acts on all levels. Many educational institutions carry out preparation in the evening and in the period of vacation.
The education comparable to the higher education accepted in Russia and other republics of the former USSR is provided generally at the universities of the country, but it can be also received in a number of institutes of technology and polytechnical education centers. The healthcare system of New Zealand of the Megosti Penchant and its basis is under construction on regional councils for healthcare.
District health boards. 21 similar organization works in the country, financing of their work carries out the state.
Their main objective is the complete solution of problems of public health care in their territory and integration of all structures and links of a national system of health protection at the territory. The following link of a healthcare system of New Zealand are the organizations and the experts providing so-called main medical care.
Primary health care. This concept includes all extra hospital services provided to New Zealanders, including services of the doctors and medical experts who are carrying out primary receptions. Services of the experts and the organizations which are carrying out observation of health of the population are providing educational and information medical services. Services of dentists and psychologists. Services of osteophlmates and chiropractic. Experts of the main medical care, though can receive the state subsidizing, but, most often, work independently out of the systems of the public medical institutions. The following important link of a healthcare system of New Zealand should be considered the organizations of a healthcare system. Primary health organizations. Which hospitals, the specialized medical centers and sanitary and hygienic institutions treat.
The state exercises control of a full complex of questions of health care in the country through structure of the Ministry of Health of
Ministry of Health. The ministry at the expense of the state budget and off-budget receipts carries out structural financing of the industry. A main objective of such financing need of granting equal opportunities of receiving medical care all to country segments of the population is considered. For this reason the state hospitals in a number of cases render the free help, and through the system of the State Accident Compensation Corporation each New Zealander can receive the free help in result of accident.
The state also allocates grants to the population for purchase of the big list of medicines and carries out payment of pensions and grants in case of long diseases or disability.
The developed system of private medical insurance also works in the country.
The first police division in New Zealand was created in 1840 from among 6 British constables sent to the country.
In 1886, the Uniform Law Enforcement Organisation, which received the name Constabulary Forces of New Zealand, was for the first time created. Police of New Zealand. The Commissioner heads national operating. National managers. NA rank and public administration is exercised of the Minister of Police. The headquarters of police is located in Wellington, and for operational management in the country 12 regional police centres work. On specifics of work of Division of Police are divided into the general management, management of criminal investigations and management of road safety. Training of police officers happens in the only thing in the country, Royal New Zealand Police College. Royal New Zealand Police College. Number of staff of police is about 10500 people, including civil experts. The New Zealand police officers usually have at themselves no firearms and have only bludgeons and gas sprays. Since 2007, police officers the right to use electroconvulsive weapon is granted. Divisions of police are the police officers armed with firearms are attracted only for performance of special tasks. Except tasks of maintenance of public order, the police of New Zealand also deal with the issues connected with ensuring national security, including fight against terrorism. In some cases, stipulated by the legislation, for protection of national security, the police of New Zealand can resort to the help of armed forces of the country. Police officers often participate in joint international works on maintenance of an order in the countries of the Pacific region. The police of New Zealand actively participate in work of the Interpol. Polls show that about 60% of the population of the country positively and with sympathy belong to work of police. National phone of the emergency call of police -111. Security Service of New Zealand. New Zealand Security Intelligence Service (SIS) is more rare than SIS. The National Prospecting and Counter-Prospecting Organisation of New Zealand, operating since 1956.
SIS, the civil organization limited in a number of questions of operational activity directly in the territory of the most New Zealand bylaw.
The headquarters of the organisation is located in the capital of the country, the city of Wellington. Officers work in the cities of Christchurch and Auckland.
The organization is accountable directly to the cabinet of the country.
The number of employees presumably doesn't exceed 140 people. The budget in the estimated analysis of 2006 is about 45 million New Zealand dollars. Government Bureau of Safety of Communication. English Government Communications Security Bureau, CACP. The National Prospecting Organisation of New Zealand, specialising in radioelectronic investigation and collection of information in safety issues of communication systems.
The organization works since 1977 and was initially formed as one of prospecting divisions of the Ministry of Defence of the country. In 2000, Bureau A received the independent status and nowadays is the civil organization subordinated directly to the Government of New Zealand.
The number of employees presumably doesn't exceed 300 people. The budget in the estimated analysis of 2006 is about 40 million New Zealand dollars. For technical support of the activity, GACP has 2 stations of observation. Earth-based stations of tracking in the Valley Vaikipai and in Tanimone are elements of the global echelon system existing within Alliance UCAS SIGINT. Also far. Write comments. Read comments. Interesting people will tell interesting stories. All of good mood and good luck.